I was told that I couldn't go to Cambridge because I was not bright enough. A winner never quits and a quitter never wins. It was 100% I'm going to prove you wrong. Now, if someone tells me it's not possible, I'll be like, I'll prove you wrong.
If you were to mentor me, what would you distill down and say, John, that's what I think you should do, which you may be not prepared for, given that you're not a Gen Z?
Entrepreneurship through social media has become highly glamorous with our generation, and people go into it not necessarily actually realising just what it takes.
My view is that every generation pisses on a generation next to them, because that's just what you do.
Something that is absolutely missing from our generation. Yeah. Go to someone and just speak to them.
Show me somebody who's ever achieved anything in this world, and I'll show you somebody who's dealt with adversity.
A very personal experience. I was abducted when I was a child. My parents divorced, and it was actually my mum took me. I was, kept in a tiny room for several years. I was abused. I was, treated horrendously.
Several years? Oh,
yeah. This was when I was 8 years old, and ultimately the people, their story, that shapes great companies.
You're a Gen Z and you're an entrepreneur. So that's an unusual combination. So we'd love to understand more about the combination of how that works. You started off your entrepreneurial journey very young by comparison to many. Tell me more about that. Why that happened, how that happened, what it means to you.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start from the very beginning. I had a very, I would say, somewhat exotic and interesting upbringing. So I was born in London. At the age of 3, my family moved to the Middle East. So we my father shipped us all out there, ended up growing up out in the Middle East. And it was there that I was exposed to entrepreneurship. So my father ran his own business out there. He took the bold step in setting up out there at a really interesting time. And this was kind of early 2000s. I'm not sure if you were ever out in the Middle East at that time, but it was pretty much a desert. Yeah. So I got to see a city pretty much being built from scratch. And then B, I got to see my dad, building his business brick by brick and seeing, the hustle, the time that he put in, him building up his client base. And I think those years were really formative. And growing up, I knew that entrepreneurship was an option. And I knew that it was a viable career path that I could take. So I think all of that led me to, eventually start my own company. And I think all of that started through my kind of family background.
You clearly had the experience of up close and personal entrepreneurship. Yeah. And I think a lot of times when that happens, there's a young family and the kids are feeling like neglected because either the mom or the dad or both are entrepreneurs and they don't have time for anything else because it's a very time-consuming career option or choice. Yeah. Was that the case as well? Was a bit of that?
Well, my dad kind of took me to meetings with him. So, he was there negotiating with his clients and I was there, playing with my Barbie dolls.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting to see that. That was something I found really exciting, actually.
That's interesting. So the up close and personal experience you had, even as a young child, was exciting. Yeah. So it wasn't negative in any way. It wasn't like any more attention.
I actually loved it, and often there would be some kind of thing, little prize involved with coming with him.
Was that the point at which you thought to yourself, okay, I'm going to do this, so this is something I want to do. I've got the entrepreneurial bug, even though you may not know what it meant.
I think there was definitely an awareness. I would say the actual kind of bug, if you like, came much later in life. So I guess to add to the story, so I came back to the UK when I was about 12. I also lived in Turkey for a bit as my mother was Turkish, then came back to the UK and then grew up here. And it was when I was 15 or so kind of in school and we were studying for our GCSEs that our friends were absolutely obsessed with charity shopping at the time. So charity shopping. So this was like a massive thing like between the kind of 15 and 16-year-olds at the time. So we would go and we would buy, like your Chanel, your Prada, and we'd find them in the charity shops. And this was then when eBay was really taking off as well. And we would then resell it. Yeah, so...
Buy low, sell high.
Exactly. So we would buy it for like, £5-10, which is actually ridiculous to think of it now. Then this led to my first business, which I started at 18. So obviously I ended up going to university. I studied architecture. And this business actually fueled a lot of my kind of spending at university. Because I realized that when I went to university, I really didn't want to work for someone else. I ended up looking at like student jobs, like, working in a cafe or, working in a shop. But I just found that absolutely horrendous. I was like, there's no way I'm going to do that. And I found myself very self-motivated and motivated by having a project and really taking that on and having the ownership. My first business was buying and reselling these secondhand clothing. And I did my undergraduate studies at Bath. And then that platform then pivoted into a fashion magazine. which was also really exciting as well. And it was a print magazine that, sold to several hundred people. Unfortunately, it didn't take off in the way that I'd hoped, but it was a really great lesson.
So this bit about, realizing you didn't want to work for anybody else, that's kind of, you skipped 15, 20 years there, because most people kind of go through that period of time and I don't really want to do this for longer than 15, 20 years or whatever it is, let's give up that day job.
That is something that I definitely knew. That being said, obviously I did go out and get, experience and I ended up, when I did my undergrad, I went for, the architecture studios. I worked there for several years, also worked within kind of real estate as well. So all of that was very formative, and I think added to my increasing desire to go into kind of entrepreneurship full time, working for other people. I enjoyed serving them. I enjoyed being there, being a part of their vision, but found that ultimately I wanted to build my own vision, to have that ownership. And I found that I was much more self-motivated.
You weren't scared by that, because a lot of people think, if I had the wherewithal, I would follow my dream. But that's such a huge step, and I'm uncertain, and I haven't got the experience, and what do I know? And it's but a lot of people, a lot of time, get in their own way of making these sort of decisions. But that wasn't the case for you at all, no?
Well, look, I definitely was scared. That's not to say I wasn't scared or had, elements of imposter syndrome, or felt that, I was too young, or, looked at other people who had succeeded, who were definitely older than me. We're living in such an exciting world where these things are an option. And obviously I saw that from a young age, that this is an option. And if you work hard at it, and if you are determined and you have those kind of character traits, you definitely can succeed in it. You mentioned about my age, but I do honestly feel like I feel like an old soul in a young person's body.
Sure. Yeah.
I feel like because of what I've experienced in life at such a young age, and I know we're going to go on to talk about adversity and things like that. I think all of that adds to my kind of maturity. I think that's definitely, I'd say what's got me to where I am now.
Let's talk about university then in that case. So why bother? You aspire to doing this thing, which is kind of has become entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Why just do that? And why do you need formal education?
Yeah, so, I definitely think you don't need to go to university. I know many great people that haven't. I mean, a really formative example is Stephen Bartlett. He dropped out of university. I had actually a friend who he was at Bath with me. He did the MBA there, and he had this great business idea for this influencer marketing business, and he dropped out within 1 year. And I was friends with him, and then he went on to scale in the US, did absolutely insane things, and it's crazy. And I think part of my journey was to somewhat fueled by family desires. And I completely respect that. And I do think that education is so important. Obviously, training, learning. I think we were talking about this a little bit earlier as well. And I definitely have a great passion for architecture and design, and studying that was so formative in building up that kind of skill set.
Architecture is a really interesting discipline, and maybe in a different world, different life, I might have been an architect or something like that. Because to my view, which may be right or wrong, it combines technical discipline with creativity, and it's an unusual kind of combination. I think. Is that part of your choice to go down that road, or was it something different?
I was very good at mathematics, and I was very artistic, and having that kind of skill set, brought me to study architecture essentially. Having those two minds, the creative mind and the more analytical mind, I think also is so helpful for entrepreneurship, because you have to wear many different hats and you have to be good at many different things, and to juggle all of that is not easy. And I think architecture taught me that very well.
Did it really? Give me some examples. How did that kind of prepare you for entrepreneurship?
So the process of building a building is pretty much identical to starting a company. So I'll explain why. So if you take, for example, a building project, you have your kind of ideation stage. So you have coming up with ideas, concepts. You have then your testing stage, and you could call that prototyping. You can then go out to customers, clients, big kind of communities, and test that idea. Be like, look, is this an idea you think that would fit into this community, this building concept? Then you build, and then you launch it. That's pretty much exactly the same as building a startup. The only difference I would say is obviously once you've built your building, you can't go back and then iterate it. That's it's set, right?
It's done, yeah.
So the iteration stage in architecture comes between the kind of the build and the prototype. Whereas with entrepreneurship, you can have that, but typically you kind of build, you launch, and then you go back and you edit your your MVP or anything like that.
Right.
So it's very similar. And I think other than studying a kind of an MBA or a business related degree, I honestly think that studying architecture is one of the best degrees you could do if you want to be an entrepreneur as well.
But the educational element of it and the preparation for it influenced or informed your kind of founder mindset.
Yeah, no,
That's
absolutely.
fantastic.
I mean, there's obviously the element of the knowledge bit. So obviously you need to, other than knowing how to actually build a building, there's like the mathematics, there's the building law, then there's the business of building, right? These things do work as commercial projects, which have to have a return on investment. That functions very similar to knowing kind of commercial strategy for building a business. If you look at architects and, they're passionate. And to be an entrepreneur, you have to be passionate. You can't be in it necessarily for the paycheck, especially in the early days, because it's just not there.
It's definitely not there.
And then there's the long hours, the long days.
I believe you really do need to be a bit of a masochist to even want to become an entrepreneur. And then even when you're doing it, you're kind of thinking, is this worth it? And then there's so many things which take your mind off the longer term vision. And it's just quite a confusing period of time. So you have to be quite driven. I remember my uncle telling me, and my uncle since passed away, but he was an orthopedic surgeon, and he did piano lessons specifically for the reason that he would have dexterity in his fingers, right? He went to grade 8 or whatever. He got, he could play the piano quite well, much better than anybody else in the family.
Wow.
But he had no interest in music. He just did that to practice his skill set because he always wanted to be a surgeon. Was that the same for you then? Did you use the architectural preparation, if you like, as grounding for setting up your business, or did it just happen that way?
I always saw myself as this person that, on one side loves architecture, but loves and does all these other things. And an interesting fact was, so I set up this fashion blog and I ended up going to London Fashion Week. And I was photographed and featured in Vogue as one of the best street style influencers. And what was really funny was my friend cut my hair really short, so I kind of looked like a boy in the photo. So if you do Google my name, you might find this photo, but it's actually hilarious.
But that's why all your friends at university were annoyed, because they thought they should have thought of that they were annoyed. It wasn't a side hustle; it was the notoriety you got. You'd be in the right place at the right time, but you have to work at that, right?
Exactly.
It doesn't happen.
Yeah, I was definitely someone that always had ideas, and I, still to this day, I keep an idea log of, pain points I have and how I can,
idea
solve
log.
them. Every time I have somewhat of a problem, I'll write an idea that I have for it. So most recently, so I love matcha. And, to get good matcha, you have to go to a coffee shop, and you can't buy good matcha in a supermarket.
Yeah, so these are business ideas then.
Yeah,
these are like opportunities you can see.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Even when I set up the Modernist, the problem that we're trying to solve, innately I experienced that. And that was something that I almost made a log of, but that actually developed into a business. Yeah.
What's that about? What problem are you solving then? And where did that idea come from?
At the Modernist, we're a hospitality tech startup, and we allow professionals to access the world's best spaces, communities, experiences. And the way I love to pitch that to investors is the class pass of members clubs. So essentially one membership for customers that gives you access to private members clubs, social, wellness, events, experiences, all with one membership. So you don't have to join multiple different memberships that are a single location. But then we also serve the venues that join our platform in that they get data insights, they get, access to a powerful network of, potential customers, users, and they could fill empty spaces and empty events, which is, a huge problem for them. So we're solving this kind of...
Two separate needs.
Two separate
leveraging
needs.
one with the other.
Exactly.
Great.
So very, kind of like a marketplace model, very similar to ClassPass in kind of what they did, but in kind of the spaces and communities segment.
I'm going to ask you a really non-entrepreneurial question here because I like doing this, but why did nobody do this before? It sounds like a perfect Venn diagram of a sweet spot that needs to be served. How come it didn't exist?
Well, look, so there are concepts that have been done before. Obviously, you've heard of concierge companies, right? So your classic concierge company typically caters for your ultra high net worth individual. They'll send in requests, be like, hey, I'm at Monaco. Can I get, F1 tickets? they'll be like, yeah, sure, it's like £10,000 or however much they charge. But that market is typically catered to ultra high net worth individuals. But what's really interesting in the past couple of years, especially post-COVID, what we're seeing is the rise of accessible luxury. And that is predominant, amongst the Gen Zs, the millennials, the slightly younger generation who want to access these experiences, but don't necessarily quite have the money that an ultra high net worth individual would have. So what we see is a huge market demand for younger people to access these things that were typically segregated, from them. And we're solving that need for that market. That's not to say those things didn't exist, but it was very much behind closed doors and hush-hush. So what we're doing is very different and very exciting.
So it's all about accessibility or democratization. Accessibility is probably a better way to describe it.
Yeah.
So was there a particular aha moment at any stage which said, this is a really good idea? First of all, you can see there's a need, but how much of a need? How big is this need? But something must have happened and said, okay, this is a real need with a real market and therefore a business opportunity.
This was actually whilst I was at Cambridge, and the problem I had, so I innately experienced the problem that I'm trying to solve. Essentially, I was living in London, living in Cambridge because I was studying part-time and traveling between the two cities. But then I was also in Paris, and I was traveling a lot, and found that I had my memberships in London. Like I had my co-working membership, my members club membership, my events membership, and all those were great if I was London-based. But because I was traveling so much, A, it was a waste of money, but B, it was also very expensive. And then C, it was that I didn't even use half of them half the time. So I loved using ClassPass because I can, go to Paris, book my Pilates class, go to the Pilates class, but not be committed necessarily to that place.
That location.
And then I could come to London, again, similar thing. So I was like, why can't there be that same concept, but for the spaces that I love to experience and the people I like to meet through events. So that's kind of how it started, really. And I had that kind of that moment, and again made a log of it. And I was writing my thesis at the time, and then started almost writing a business plan, with all these ideas. And I ended up speaking to several people in my network. Then it kind of broadened the research. Then their friends started talking about it, etc. And it was kind of this process of being very committed, sitting down each week to put X amount of hours into it, being like, okay, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to block some time out, be very disciplined.
To develop this idea further, but in a particular direction, not just kind of think about it.
I applied to architecture jobs. I did not get a single one. And I applied for consulting, investment banking, etc. And was getting offers. And I was like, okay, this is my calling to leave the industry. Yeah. And then I started this business on very much on the side and as a newsletter. So £28 Flow Desk subscription, which is a newsletter platform. Started up a newsletter, got people to subscribe to this, started validating through selling tickets, doing market research, sending out surveys, being like, what do you guys want to see within this? And then building from there, which I think was really powerful in the early stages.
So you're a big fan of side hustles then? At least that's worked for you, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes to my detriment. I think what I found was I was obviously working my 9 till 6, coming back home, doing 7 till 11 p.m, pretty much most days, which ended up not being so sustainable in the end. But
I remember having this conversation with somebody else, and coming from a different generational approach, which is a topic I really want to delve into, and I find this fascinating as well. Somebody talked to me about side hustles, and my instant reaction was, forget it, it's a waste of time, because you never do it justice, right? You have the idea, and then you got to just focus on the idea and just work at it incessantly and give it your all, and there's a chance that it might work.
There's definitely a place for that, but in my case as well, I just left university. I didn't necessarily have the financial means to completely go by myself and do it myself. So partly it was driven by financial needs, and then secondly as well, whilst I would say I like taking risks, I like taking calculated risks, and I knew that this would be a risk that if I was to go full time, I needed to see people spending money and there being revenue coming through. Right. I was like, I knew we wanted to raise and to approach investors. I was like, no investor's going to invest if there's not nothing there. So part of that was tactical, and then part of it was driven by financial need.
I love the point you make about I need to see people spending money on it, because in terms of my businesses have always all been about products, as opposed to services, and it's been stuff that sits on a retail shelf. It's a very kind of tangible thing, and you can talk to people all day long, and they'll tell you wonderful things about you, about your product. They'll say it's great. That's useful at early stage, but that's actually irrelevant until you put it on a shelf where you say, okay, pay me for it.
Yeah.
And they go, yeah. Well, no, hang on. If you said all this great stuff about me and the product and it fits a need, and I can't live without it. Well, then pay for it.
Yeah.
And if they pay for it, then that's validation of all the stuff they said before. If you don't pay for it, think through why not, or maybe you need to change something about it, or it's just a bad idea. And you've been, deluding yourself.
Going slightly back to that aha moment, I mean, it was pretty crazy because we'd launched the newsletter, then the Instagram, and we were getting requests through from Instagram being like, oh, I want to access the events, like, can I book? And it was crazy. And I was like, oh my God, like, okay, there could actually be something here. And then we got to a point where there was 600 people already on the newsletter, and we were organizing events at all the different members clubs and the co-working spaces, and that was actually bringing in a decent enough revenue. So I was like, okay, I can leave my job now. I feel confident in the idea that I'm building. I know my metrics. I can definitely go into this full time.
You're kind of a living, breathing example of entrepreneurship in the modern age. It's all about accessibility, modernity, mobility, and side hustles. So, balancing the options here, and not committing to one thing because you haven't got the wherewithal to do it. Which comes back to accessibility again, in terms of, I'll save up enough money to be able to start a business, a lot of people. Said a lot of people in my generation, and I think still do, if that's what they want to do. But what you're demonstrating is, not just saying, demonstrating as well, you could do that, for sure. But that's not the only way.
Yeah.
You can begin to generate momentum, given modern technology and the way people think, these days more so than before.
Everyone has their own journeys. Obviously, I've found friends who have, gone in straight away, had an idea, raised, etc. Mine has obviously been slightly different, and I would say slightly longer, but also has its insights and its learnings. And I found that because I hadn't as well done something specifically within the hospitality sector, that was not my background, that was not my area of expertise. I needed time to learn about it. I needed time to sit in front of venues, sit in front of people, ask them, what is the problem here? How can I solve this problem for you? And I think this is, again, a problem with a lot of businesses, is that they're not necessarily solving an innate problem for users, right? And that is so important for me, is to constantly sit in front of customers, constantly be like, okay, what is the problem? How can I continue to help?
A lot of times people come up with, another problem. I had 3 problems I've thought of today already. So you know what? This isn't going to work, as opposed to trying to solve them. Or the problem with that is kind of response is kind of another way of saying this won't work because, right? Yeah. Or this has never been solved before, or nobody has done this before, or problem. I guess what you say is opportunity, or I'm putting words in your mouth. Tell me more about if that is the case.
So in terms of the Modernists, we've actually done something really interesting in the past couple of months, in that we have like a WhatsApp community, but within that we have a group called Customer Feedback. And we've added our top kind of 50 customers into that, and they give us live feedback. So I get WhatsApp messages, and we've just recently pushed some web app updates in our kind of tech infrastructure, and they're like, oh, like, have you thought of this? I've just noticed this. And then that's all live feedback, and we send that to the developers, and they change it, and it makes the experience so much better for them. So if you're able to get that live feedback loop, it's so helpful.
What's been your biggest challenge?
There's been so many challenges. I'm sure, as you know,
as
you know yourself, I think entrepreneurship is never this like linear line. It's this kind of weaving kind of graph that goes up and down, and there's been some huge highs, some huge wins, but then also some big lows, and navigating that is not easy. But I think one of the ones has been we have bootstrapped the business for the past 2 years, and that has come, I don't think people have realized this, but that has come with huge self-sacrifice. I mean, I didn't pay myself a salary pretty much for like 2 years from the business. I was constantly reinvesting that money. That meant for me, that looked like, okay, I can't buy really nice clothes or new clothes. I can't get my nails done, so I have to do my nails myself. I have to, make all these sacrifices because I think there's something here that's really valuable. So people don't see that. People see the nice social media, they see the nice images, but they don't realize the blood, sweat and tears that goes into that. So I'd say the bootstrapping has not been easy, and then the limited resources that you have with the limited funds that, obviously there's money coming in, but, technology and everything, even paying or hiring someone costs so much money.
Right. You intend to then raise money to inject
so we're,
to fuel growth? Is that your plan?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're raising at the moment.
Great.
But I will get onto that. But I would say bootstrapping, and then now that we've fairly recently started our raise, it's also been the fundraising.
Because
of kind of the environment that we're also raising in is not easy.
To run a business and run a cap table at the same time is very difficult. A lot of the time people, okay, I'm going to raise money, and then they kind of get stuck in and realize, oh, this is a really big job, actually, raising money. And then the business goes on hold for like 3 months because you can't physically go anywhere. There's no way of doing both properly.
In terms of the fundraising, so I knew I wanted to raise last year. So I knew that I needed, A, in terms of my knowledge, but B, in terms of to get the business to a certain point, to be that ready, to that ready stage.
Sure.
And that took, I would say, a good 6 to 8 months of preparation. So I did an accelerator course called Female Founders Rise. So they run accelerators for female founders. Okay. So I did that and spoke to a lot of, angels, VCs, investors. What do you want to see in a pitch deck? What do you want to see in terms of numbers? Like, how do we get this primed and ready to really hit the ground running and making those connections? Because I didn't have those connections at first. So it was reaching out to people being like, hey, look, would love to get a coffee with you. This is what we're building. Can you give us some advice? And people are really open and really generous with their time. So if you're able to capitalize on those resources and also, not necessarily go straight into it, but spend some time doing the hard homework, like getting your data room together, getting your pitch deck together, like being super organized. Mm-hmm. I think that does bode really well rather than going straight into it and figuring it out in the chaos.
I often say that, bootstrap until you know what you're doing. And when you know what you're doing, then go big. I mean, it's like, it's an absolute, really. It's like bootstrap until you know what you're doing. Now, that sounds like arrogant. Who am I to say you know what you're doing? But you will recognize when you know what you're doing. Because at the beginning, you're going, I've no idea what I'm doing. And then I've got to figure this out. And then I gradually figure it, and then I get more confident, and then it gathers momentum. But at some point you think, okay, this has gathered enough momentum that I can convince somebody else to give me money from my business, and that's when you know what you're doing. And then it's like, why wait any longer? Go big, raise a lot of money, and because you know what you're doing. And you know if you spend that money in this area, you'll be able to get a return on the investment and pull the right levers and you'll grow your business. So it's kind of like, is that what you are?
You've hit the nail on the head. I mean, we also started off in a very niche market. We were very much, I would say, more on the on this more kind of high-end luxury side of things. I was like, get access and go to these amazing events. And that's kind of how it started. But that's developed, a lot more now in that, we are ready to scale because we have a great platform that serves two needs, and we've got the data, we've got the insights, we've got the revenue, and we've got the users to back that. Once you know that you can have this kind of element of the business that is highly, highly scalable and gives the investors those multiples they're looking for, then absolutely go for it.
If I was on the investment side of the table, one of my kind of early on questions would be, I'll throw this at you, is like, what's your ambition? Like, why do you want to set this up in the first place? It's gathering momentum and it's exciting and all that, but you're a very purposeful kind of person. You wouldn't have started something unless you meant to finish it. What does finishing it look like?
I absolutely see this becoming a global business. We're aiming to pilot in Paris and New York next year, which are huge cities for kind of social concepts, for events, for experiences. And we see huge potential there in terms of an untapped market. And then further afield, the Middle East. So currently, as we speak, there's several exciting projects going on in the Middle East to launch kind of social spaces, wellness. We see that becoming a really big market in the next 5 years. So we see this becoming kind of a global membership that allows you access to all these amazing experiences that you wouldn't be able to get elsewhere.
In terms of the people who are listening to this podcast, it's kind of like entrepreneurs, budding entrepreneurs, or entrepreneurs who have begun and kind of like maybe got a bit stuck, or those on some stage on their journey. And it's often interesting to kind of listen. Every business is different, every entrepreneur is different. So I'm not trying to say this is always going to be applicable to everybody. But it's like sometimes when somebody's listening to this, they kind of think, oh yeah, I should really figure out the answer to that question, because you give some really good answers to some questions, I feel. And it's kind of like, I wonder what, sparked the challenge. I wonder what my answer to that question. If somebody asked me that question, and it's a very basic question, what's your ambition? It's like, I mean, have you not thought of the answer? But it's amazing, and I include myself in this, because you think of an idea and you get wrapped up in it, and it's just like 2 years later, momentum is like, you haven't got time to figure out where you're going with this. And that seems like weird. Why wouldn't you? Because how did you get started without knowing where you're going? But a lot of the time, entrepreneurs don't really know where they're going, or they haven't really thought it through to the... I know things, plans change, and if you say, I'm going to go there, you'll probably end up here, but at least you've got a plan. And you won't end up going that way. You'll end up going that way. At least that is the case. But the reality is that a lot of time it's like this monster that you create as a business just takes you over. It runs you rather than you run it.
You know, there definitely are moments where I do feel that. That being said, the best advice I can give around that is be very self-reflective.
Self-reflective.
And by that, what I mean is I always take one day a month as like kind of like a day where I just reflect on everything. What that looks like is me looking at the business overall. It looks at, looking at my tasks, my actions. Am I putting the right time into the right things? And it looks like assessing what the team are doing. Are they putting the right time and energy into the right things? So I think taking a step back sometimes is the most powerful thing you could do to take leaps forward. And I think what I find as well, and what I see is that, being an entrepreneur, you're very much in the state of doing, but not necessarily stepping back. And stepping back sometimes is the most powerful thing you can do. And it seems very counterintuitive, but actually is so fundamental. And then that also for me looks like, okay, I have my monthly kind of check-ins, but I also have quarterly with the team and with everyone where we literally pretty much scrap everything. And we're like, okay, so what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? What does it look like for the next quarter? How can we deliver on X, Y, Z? And having a week of just strategizing and not looking at any emails, not being distracted, not taking any calls, and just being purely focused.
You said earlier that you got paraphrasing old head on young shoulders or something like that. That's a great example of that because I agree with you, but I've got a couple of years in the tank and I've figured this out over a period of time. So how did you get to figure that? Was that one of the advantages you got from your dad? Did that kind of happen by osmosis because you were exposed to this when you were 6? Or and I'm not saying he did that necessarily, but it's a very structured way. But what's going to help me run my business well? And it's not like doing. It's doing a lot, but it's self-reflection.
Really good question. I'm not entirely sure where it came from. I think I've just always been like that. Since a young age, I've always journaled. I have literally journals dating back from when I was 8 years old and just writing stuff, and I've always been like that. And I wouldn't say that's necessarily something I got from my family. It's just a habit that I developed. Who's really good for this? And actually I'm reading a book at the moment called Principles by Ray Dalio. Yeah. I'm sure you've heard of him. Sure. And that is a really great kind of self-reflective book because it asks all those questions based on principles and set values.
Switching gears then, so you got this new project, as if this weren't enough. You got this, which is kind of like still in stealth mode, if you like, or you're working on it. But tell me more about why on earth taking on something new? Or is this an extension of what you do? Or talk more about like the Harvard Innovation Lab's idea.
I'm very passionate about this one because it very much stems from my desire for kind of mission-driven ventures. And this is a really exciting one that I'm working alongside a friend who's based in New York. And I can't say too much, but it's essentially using technology to prevent and analyze abduction cases. A very personal experience. I gave a TED talk about this. So I was abducted when I was a child. Wow. So I experienced a specific kind of abduction called parental abduction. Parental abduction. So my parents divorced, and it was actually my mom took you somewhere else, right. Exactly, during their kind of divorce case, and I was kept in a tiny room for several years. I was abused. I was treated horrendously. This was when I was 8 years old, and I won't go into it on a huge level of detail because you could watch the TEDx talk, but again, it forms a part of that entrepreneurial journey because at such a young age I experienced such adversity and such trials that, and I overcame that having that mindset that actually, I overcame that, so I can overcome this challenge that I'm facing in work, or I can overcome this. So it very much formed my mindset at a young age, but that kind of abduction experience obviously has led me to do several kind of charity initiatives. I've done some mentoring for a parental abduction charity called Reunite in the UK. I've worked on several kind of abduction cases and oversaw, other people have similar issues. Right. I've spoken with families in the US and mentored them and helped them with their cases. So I've seen the problem inside out, and what we're trying to solve is that we're looking at technologies that can prevent those and help families get legal aid, help families be connected to the right, people that can help them and help the children as well.
Clearly a very kind of personal, emotional motivation for getting it. So I can see how that's kind of worked its way into to fight for your time for you to do this.
It has totally kind of come out the blue in that we had the idea for it for ages and we applied to the labs, not really thinking we would actually even get in because it was such an early stage. And and it has. So we're like, okay, let's let's kind of run with
now
it.
You've got one of these what I call high quality problems. It's like, I mean, it'll never happen, so let's do it anyway. And then, okay, now I've got to resource that or find time for that. So what would you kind of set up another different team to run that, do that, or maybe run this and do that yourself?
So I'm very lucky. I have a great partner in crime who's very committed as well, and he's taken on, I would say, a lot in kind of helping start that and
But
run
your
that
personal story is integral to not just selling the
Absolutely.
story and getting support or investment or whatever, but also doing it.
Absolutely, I
want to pick up on 2 points you made there. Adversity and learning at a young age. Adversity makes you stronger, for a start. It's a very kind of traditional, old-fashioned way of looking at it, maybe, but I'd love to hear your view. And also, it's like somebody once said, when I'm hopeless on quotes, I can usually remember them. I can never remember who said them, but like, show me somebody who's ever achieved anything in this world, and I'll show you somebody who's dealt with adversity. In other words, kind of the corollary of that is like you don't achieve anything worthwhile without dealing with adversity. I'm not sure if that's true necessarily, but I certainly can see how adversity can be an opportunity.
Yeah.
But all that sounds weird because people will be thinking adversity is to be avoided because it gets in the way and it makes life more difficult and it's very uncomfortable and all those things. Why people do avoid adversity. My personal view is no, you don't have to go seeking it out because if you're an entrepreneur, that's one way to seek it out for sure. It just comes at you, right?
Oh, I have so much to say about this, so I might ramble on a little bit. So sorry about that. And you know what it reminds me of is that there's that song that's like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Which is a great song. I won't grace you with my singing for this podcast, but another time.
I think different generations have different ways of dealing with it. Either suck up, stiff upper lip and get on with it, or talk about it. But one way or the other, you got to deal with it. So how do you deal with it?
Going back to my childhood story, then I'll relate it to business as well. But I mean, when I came back to the UK, I was, my father ended up finding me. He brought me back to the UK, and I ended up from that point on having a very normal, happy, great childhood. But he taught me the lessons of never giving up. And, at a young age, he was like, a winner never quits and a quitter never wins. I think there's that Vince Lombardi quote, which is really, really famous. And those kind of values really shaped me from a young age.
That's where it came from then, right?
Yeah. And, he left, again, there's more of it in my TED Talk, and please definitely go and watch it because it is very inspiring. But he pretty much took a year or 2 years out of his main job to come and try and find me, which, lost a lot of his money and, just the mental strain and the difficulty of obviously having your child taken away from you. A hugely dark time for us and our family. And then, we came back and we had to rebuild our lives from scratch. And, I was so behind at school. I was the bottom of my class at everything. And you asked earlier what was my drive to go to university, was that I was told that I couldn't go to Cambridge because I was not bright enough.
Because of that, but because you've fallen behind so much.
Because I was fallen behind so much. And it was that drive that, I ended up taking extra lessons. I went from your D to your A star, and pretty much getting 100% of my mathematics A level.
Let's just dwell on that for a moment. So what was that like? What did you feel?
It was 100% I'm going to prove you wrong. Right. And it's something that I'm like now, if someone tells me it's not possible, I'll be like, I'll prove you wrong.
Red rag to a bull.
Give me a few months. Yeah.
We were told by all the people who should have known better, New Covent Garden Soup Company, what a crazy idea.
I love the soups, by the way.
They're
great.
Delighted to hear that. It's been around a while. We set the business up in 1987 and we sold it in 1998. So it's a long time ago.
I was 1 year old.
But the brand is, well, thank you, but the brand is still there and it's still going strong. Yeah. But way back in 1987, liquid soup was only in a can. There was no liquid soup other than in a can. So you really got to imagine this because liquid soup, fresh soup, it's ubiquitous. It's all over the place. It's kind of like a thing that exists and you don't even notice and you carry on with your life.
So interesting.
And we said, we're going to make fresh soup. We're going to put it in a carton. And we were told by the microbiologists that we'd kill somebody if you didn't sterilize it. But you do. Liquid soup is in a can for a very good reason. It's to make it safe. And we're going, but the process of making it safe makes it taste rubbish. The experts who should have known more about it than anybody else said, that's the reason, so don't do it. Very non-entrepreneurial. Just don't go around that. There's a reason why it's that way. And just stick with it. And then the guy said, the carton is a stupid idea. You put milk in a carton, you don't put soup in a carton. Consumers won't understand it. And then they say you never get chilled space. There's already a destination for soup. It's called the soup aisle. Why would you mess with that? everything has happened since to prove all those wrong. And in fact, the carton to this day is the only fresh soup in a carton is New Covent Garden Soup Company.
And within that, as you mentioned, like in your story, it's kind of pushing the boundaries of what could be done, but doing it in a way that, has the kind of the backing, the data, everything behind it. But sometimes you have to make decisions that don't necessarily align with XYZ, but you just have that feeling.
Okay, so that was the dealing with adversity kind of thing, and making adversity as your friend.
I actually wanted to add an analogy to that. So on the adversity topic, and I think sometimes we all have adversity. Everyone goes through something in life at some point, some big, some small, and it all kind of forms this canvas of our life, if you like. And for years I felt that my story was something I would hide, I would not share with anyone. I was always quite ashamed of it and felt really disempowered. But what I realized, later in life, that actually this is something that can hugely impact people and, influence them. And especially I found this in my undergraduate studies. So I started talking with people, but within, close friends, and they were like, this is incredibly inspiring. Sure. Just sitting with you for 30 minutes makes me want to do X, Y, Z. Yeah. And it was that made me realize that actually my story is my superpower. And,
indeed.
People can take X, Y, Z away from me in terms of, my accolades, my academic achievements, etc., but they can't take away my story. And this comes to an analogy that I have in that. So say I go to you, John, okay, John, I want you to invest in my startup. I went to Cambridge and now I'm doing this. You might say, okay, yeah, great. Do you have SCIS? Fine. But then I might say to John... It
might be a very short conversation, yeah.
And then I might say, John, I've gone through, I was kidnapped at the age of 8. I've gone through this. I overcame this. Yet I went to Cambridge on a fully funded scholarship as well. And I've overcome that. I've gone to start my own business. Do you want to invest? Of course, that's a very different story because you're judging me now by my characteristics that I've demonstrated to you in that story rather than necessarily by my academic achievements.
Sure. It's a completely different term of reference. And it's like, yes, there might be lots of technical reasons and I can offset my risk and sound like a great idea. I won't give it, here's 50 grand towards, have 10 conversations and you suddenly got a bit of money.
Yeah.
As opposed to realizing, hey, what a story of adversity and dealing with it, and maybe it's not that particular adversity that's relevant to this business, but that demonstrates your resilience, that demonstrates your ability to deal with problems. And setting up your own business, doesn't matter what the idea is, you're going to have lots of problems. In fact, setting up your own business, I think you put yourself in the way of problems. The other piece then was learning lessons at a young age. I'm convinced that any lesson is magnified in terms of the benefit of that lesson or story or experience the younger you are. Yeah. Because you're in such informative years. I mean, being abducted at the age of 6 or 8 or whatever it is, it's like, beat that. That's like a silly thing to say, but do. Wow, it's difficult. But we all have our own version of these little stories. And my version of the story is my dad had this farm in the west of Ireland, and it was a field next to the farmhouse that I was very familiar with, and it was like home. And we went into the field one day. My dad brought me in, and he used to whistle when he walked the field, and he wasn't whistling this day. There was silence, and the calves used to frolic around, and they weren't frolicking around. They were there, but there was no movement. And then there was kind of this. 6 years of age, well, I can still get the feeling I had back then. Now, when I think about this, there was this aroma which was weird, and I later found out that the aroma was death, because all these calves were either dead or dying. And at 6, okay, it's a traumatic experience, but as a 6-year-old, it's like, what is going on here? I've never experienced, especially in a place that's so familiar to you. It's like home. This happening to you as a kid, you can't process because it's the first time it's ever happened, so you don't know how to relate to it, right? But it's really bad. It's the worst it's ever been. And you can't imagine it being any worse than this. That speaks very loudly to an investor, coming full circle on the conversation, speaks very loudly to an investor who's looking for somebody who knows a bit about the market and the idea, but has resilience to be able to implement. Because all these wonderful ideas, to my mind, New Covent Garden Soup Company, the idea started in a pub, by the way.
Oh, really?
But so many good ideas start in the pub, but the majority of them stay in the pub because they're great ideas and nobody ever does anything about them. Right?
Well, yeah, I think as well, adding to that, I think 80% of entrepreneurship to some degree is your character traits, right? Character traits. So by that, I mean, your strength, your resilience, your ability to be a great leader, not necessarily your knowledge or like how academic you are. And then I would say say 20% is how academic you are.
Uh-huh.
That would be my take on things, because, you know, my day-to-day in the Modernists, things go wrong, and it's how do you deal with that? And you know, innately that comes down to A, what I've experienced, but B, my values, and also how I want to do things slightly differently as well. You know, I believe that in leadership, I believe to show radical grace, generosity, and kindness in the way I do business, and that's very different to some people. And I think the way that we are at the Modernists is that we go above and beyond. You know, we do events with partners, we go buy them flowers, we go buy them cards to say thank you. No one does that these days.
Can you scale that when you get bigger? Is that, can you really still do that?
I think you can still scale that.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Great.
I don't know how many cars I'll be riding, but
yeah, but you're delighting the customer. You're doing something that, you know, first of all, you're delivering the service they expect, and then you're going beyond that, and then they get this kind of like, you know, punctuation at the end from their experience. They go, wow. Exactly.
But yeah, I guess going back as well to the adversity bit, again, those character traits form, you know, the way that you do business. And, you know, what we see now in the kind of investment space, especially within venture capital, maybe even somewhat angel investors, sometimes they do look at your academic background, and that's kind of just forms solely the conversation. And, you know, okay, fine, I went to a great school. You know, it becomes this kind of tick box exercise of what your algorithm can find. And I think we should steer well away from that, because it's ultimately the people, their story, that shapes great companies. And I do think, I mean, we're going to get onto conversation of Gen Zs, but we do live in a age where it is more and more acceptable to share those experiences, especially, you know, through social media, through your platform, and through personal branding, which is becoming really popular now. And more people are speaking about those things and, you know, having those conversations, which I think is really great.
As an older generation, it's kind of like, it's something that I think we could have benefited from. But getting into the whole Gen Z conversation, because Gen Z is coming in for a lot of slack. Gen Z is coming for a lot of attack, if you like, for being lazy and entitled and you know, having demands which are unreasonable, etc. Usually by people of my age making accusations about that. I suppose sometimes there's always an element of truth in it, but I don't think it's very unfair to define Gen Zs by those sort of traits. But let's address that. Yeah. Do you think there is some truth in that, or that's you know, a very myopic view, or that's something that, you know, people of an older generation don't understand and therefore are looking through their particular lens? So it says more about them than it does Gen Z. Tell me about that whole thing about Gen Zs, which is a topic that everybody's talking about. Does it get in the way, or does it solve a problem, or is it real?
Well, you know, when I saw this question in the notes, I thought it was really interesting, because I'm obviously living in this generation, and I don't necessarily see things from the perspective of others. Of course. From your perspective, so you might be saying those things. I'm like, oh, I've never observed that. I've never noticed that. Am I slow? So from my lived experience, I would say I've not observed those things, and from my circle of influence, you know, there's I know some Gen Zs who are doing incredible things. Yeah. And I've never observed that, but also I'm speaking for a very select group of people, so I'm not sure kind of what the macro view is. So I'd be very interested to hear your point on this. Actually,
my view is that every generation pisses on a generation next to them, because that's just what you do. But the next generation next to them, and I know there's the generation between us here, the millennials gets in the way of if I'm Gen X, for example. But you know, it's fashionable to do so. It's expected to do so. It's weird if you don't. Yeah. But I think the generation that does it needs to look upon themselves a little bit and say, well, let's just say it's true. Whatever you're accusing the younger generation, let's just say it's true. Well, why do you think it's true? Yeah. If it's true because of the environment they're in and how you brought them up, how you raised them. It's if you're the parents, you're going to take some responsibility for the kids ending up like that, even if it's true, which we'll get on to in a minute. So if you're making that accusation, you got to take some responsibility as well. And then the second thing is it true in the first place? I'd love to know what you think about this. Is that entrepreneurship is the route through which you, if they need saving at all, this is how you save them. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Because entrepreneurship hones those skills. If you're sensitive, okay, set up your own business and you see how long that lasts. But you'll have a dose of reality. Yeah. You know? And if you feel purpose is what motivates you, okay, set up a business then. which is driven on purpose. And you soon find out how difficult it is, but it won't all be everybody should understand me because I want to have a purpose-driven life. Say, sure, but get real about it.
I think it's important to kind of debate these topics both from a kind of a global view of what Gen Zs have kind of grown up with, what they've experienced, as well as, you know, each individual kind of experience as well. Obviously, globally, you know, I grew up in the kind of early 2000s. There was obviously 9/11. There was, you know, several wars, and then now, you know, we had COVID, which has obviously hugely impacted our generation, but also definitely more for previous generations. And then, you know, I would say the economic instability, the political instability, obviously eroding trust in our kind of institutions, the kind of, I guess, fight for social justice. I mean, there's like endless issues that I could go on about. And all those, whether we like it or not, do affect us to some degree. You know, even though one might not be involved in, you know, say Russia and Ukraine, we're not over there, but it does affect us and what we see. And I think all of those do affect each generation. Each generation has their unique set of problems. Obviously, you know, if you were born during the World War I, there's that, you know, might say, for example, my grandparents, you know, their problems, you know, were shaped by that kind of macro political issue, you know, a global, you know, disaster. Then there was World War II, or, you know, if you were in the Soviet Union, there's, you know, I could go on about kind of endless examples.
Ultimately, history has a lot to answer for, but we all live in different stages of history. So back to Gen Zs then and what you're dealing with.
And you know, all of those issues do affect you. And then add to that the huge proliferation of social media, which of course you've had fuels, you know, like comparison culture, fuels, you know, FOMO, it fuels, you know, radical behavior or fake news or like radical political opinions. So it's a really fascinating time to kind of unpack all of that, really. And, you know, whilst I think social media ultimately I think is a good thing, it also has many negatives as well, which I think we need to be really careful of as a generation. And one of them actually comes back to the entrepreneurial question, in that entrepreneurship through social media has become highly glamorized with our generation, and people go into it not necessarily actually realizing just what it takes, and then 3 months later they're like, oh, I haven't made any money, I have to, you know, I don't know what I'm getting myself into, this is way harder than I thought. Even like with my own social media, sometimes I think I'm like, okay, like the photos look great, but like people don't really see, like I said, the blood, sweat and tears. So even for myself, you know, one of my aims has been to create more authentic content of what does truly entrepreneurship look like. And having, I think, a world that we can share that is hugely powerful. And then we also have the huge access to knowledge. So with that comes endless options of what you can do. And then now we have AI, which has put a huge spanner in the works of a lot of things and career paths as well. So there's just a lot to navigate, and it's not easy. But I think though there's a lot of potential and a lot of opportunity as well.
And it's irrelevant how Gen X did it to you, because you're going, well, that's like 30 years ago. Well, great, well done, but that's not me.
Yeah.
Tell me more about me and the how to my view entrepreneurship can help Gen Zs not just save themselves but save the world.
There's two elements to this. I think one being the fact that through going into entrepreneurship you're hopefully solving a very relevant question that will impact millions and help people's lives, right? That's right. I think everyone's aim and should be everyone's aspiration. But I also believe that through going into entrepreneurship we can empower Gen Zs and also help them step into leadership roles and become the leaders of tomorrow. And then alongside that comes there's several programs like YC that I believe are increasingly Gen Z, millennial. I mean they're taking very young people now. And then there's EF, so Entrepreneurs First, very young, and then most recently there's Project Europe, and that is, those programs are very much championing, younger generations getting into entrepreneurship. So there is that access available and those opportunities there. So we need to make people aware that this is actually a viable path that people can take and have structures to support that. Because I think one of the hardest things that I had with entrepreneurship was the financial instability, right? Everyone needs to make money, they need to pay their rent, they need to buy their food. And I think one of the biggest blockers to entrepreneurship is the financial element.
The accessibility point,
the accessibility point. Mainly from, I would say, the financial point of view, because if you speak to someone, they're not going to quit their job to start a company because A, they're not going to get paid immediately, and B, they don't know what's going to happen, right? So if we can make the ability for people to get paid quicker through either government funding or schemes and things like that, that I think will also push a younger generation to explore that path more fervently, I would say.
Yeah, that's really insightful. Good. Leadership though means recognizing whatever the situation is. Maybe that's an accurate description, or maybe it's not. It's actually taking responsibility and actually doing something about the situation you find yourself in.
Yeah.
How well do you think Gen Zs do at that?
Yeah, a very big question, and I'll address that in a moment when I explain the story because it'll make sense. But I went to a lecture by this group called Praxis. So they're a venture capital company based in the US, and they champion a specific framework of leadership called redemptive entrepreneurship. And they have various lectures, but there's obviously impact leadership, or impact entrepreneurship. There's several tiers of kind of impacting the world. And they say the best level is being redemptive. And what that looks like is going above and beyond just, getting out a product and it has some social impact, but it's actually impacting people's lives, being redeeming, being actually blessing those people, serving them, and going above and beyond. And I think that was what I was talking about earlier, is that ultimately, that is fundamentally what I believe, is that entrepreneurship should be redemptive. And part of that comes through my own values. So, I go to church, I believe in God, and those values and that kind of value system forms my leadership and the way that I serve and I lead.
Right.
And then there's the other element of kind of leadership that comes down to ultimately figuring out who you are as well as a person. And I think for the Gen Zs, that we need to be careful that isn't shaped by social media. So we don't see, a leader on social media, we want to be them, but embracing our own stories and our own paths and figuring out what our values are, and then, being a leader within that.
This sounds like authenticity. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Authenticity. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the perfect word.
Okay. But I mean, authenticity is it can be easy. It's a great word to use right now in this conversation, but it can be easily hijacked, meaning whatever you want it to mean, and manipulated, and political parties do it, and other movements do it as well to serve their purpose. And I think you got to be very careful, especially with social media amplifying that message. Yeah. So I think you need to look upon, or within yourself, a lot of times to understand what authenticity means to you. And one of the tools in the toolbox for Gen Zs, at any generation, but particularly for Gen Zs, that can be really helpful to do what you're describing, is set up your own business. Yeah. Because you're very exposed, you're very raw, and you learn a lot. And I think you can do things in certain ways given the current opportunities that are there and the adversities there. You could turn that into not just an opportunity, but a competitive advantage. Now, all that is just words, right? But I can see, certainly in what you've done in your career, you're only 28, right? I say only 28. But, so far, as a Gen Z, you've really personified all of that. That sounds like I'm certainly putting an awful lot of pressure on your shoulders. I'm not. You put the pressure on your own shoulders, right? You've taken responsibility. But I do believe that it's entrepreneurship that has helped you do that. And it's somebody who wants to do it and who can do it, who can demonstrate doing well, have done it, most likely through entrepreneurship in some way. And it might be in the creative and the arts, or it might be in some other way, but having an entrepreneurial approach and not expecting, to slot into an environment that does things for you. So.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And if I was to go back and change anything, I would absolutely not. I'm so thankful to be on this journey and to also have the opportunity to do it, and to be able to have the the ability to do it, and that in itself is just such an incredible blessing, and I'm so thankful for it. And that is something that when stuff does go wrong, I'm like, okay, I'm lucky to be here, and B, I've just got to get myself back up and just keep running the race.
If I were trying to set up a business now, as a Gen Xer, right? If you were to mentor me, what would you distill down and say, John, that's what I think you should do. This is the one thing or a couple of things that I think you should do, which you may be not prepared for, given that you're not a Gen Z.
I think that's a really interesting question. You know, it kind of reminds me of it. Have you ever watched Freaky Friday?
No, but I'm sure you're going to tell me. Watch Freaky Friday. Tell me more.
You don't know Freaky Friday?
Sorry.
What?
Watch Freaky Friday.
You need to go home and watch Freaky Friday.
There you go. That's the first thing.
Epic.
Tell me more.
A great film. So it's the film with Lindsay Lohan where she essentially swaps like bodies with her mum. Okay. So she becomes her mum, like her body kind of becomes her mum, and then her mum becomes her, and they end up swapping lives and living each other's lives through the other lens.
Cool.
So I'm just wondering, you know, what that would kind of look like for me and you, in that, you know, obviously for your generation, during entrepreneurship looked obviously so different to now, because now, you know, A, we have resources, B, we have network available to us, and C, we can scale so much faster. And I think those are really exciting things. And I also wonder sometimes to myself and ask myself the question, what's that going to look like for the previous generation who have AI at their fingertips? You know, are they going to be the ones building the unicorns with like one person?
We had resources and networks too, but they were like behind closed doors.
Yeah.
And you really had to work over time. And this is not saying, oh, it was tough on us. This is just the way it was. You didn't know any better, right? So all those things existed. It's just like they weren't as accessible. Back to the point you were making earlier. You part of your raison d'etre is to make things accessible, and that is one of the benefits. It's one of your competitive advantages, and that's what you're trying to achieve. And I can see how that can work. I think that the differences are not dramatic. Those 3 or 4 things don't exist. They're just that they're packaged away and.
Yeah.
You don't even, first of all, know they're there, and then you don't know.
So what did you do without LinkedIn?
Yeah, I know. We went round and we spoke to people.
Well, you know, and I think that is one thing that this is what I mean. I'm an old soul. I love speaking to people. Like, I genuinely will just go up to someone on the street and say good morning and say, how are you? And you never know what will happen. And I've even met like investors that way, you know, like, and I think that is something that is absolutely missing from our generation, that human, that ability to speak out, go to someone and just speak to them.
Now, you touched on a really interesting point there, because just speak, I know what you mean, but just speaking to them is never just speaking, because you're selling yourself, really. You might not be a hard sell, but you might just want to have a chat with somebody. You're telling a story, or you're positioning it in a way. You're just trying to fill space. It could be anything. So it doesn't have to be, I want something from this person. I know this person can give me something, therefore I'm going to pretend something. No, you're doing it in an authentic way, but you're just having a conversation. So take it right down to base level. And I think that art of talking to people, I'm not saying it's been lost, but there are so many other ways of communicating with people that you haven't even met these days. It didn't exist before. So we were just more natural at talking to people, because that's the only way we could communicate with people. There's an old word called Shanahi in Irish. I'm obviously Irish, and a Shanahi is a person, typically a male, because with that kind of society then, that walked from one townland or one town or village to the other. And that's their life. And they told stories, and they're really good at telling stories. And they would go, and they'd probably stay in the outhouse, and they were given a dinner, and they'd probably maybe go, and everybody would come around to the house and listen to this guy, usually an old codger, telling a story. If you're smart about it, it's a way to communicate. Now, if you take it into modern day, and I'm not saying that all investors have to be 50 or 60 or 70 years of age, but you're trying to talk to one of those people, it doesn't matter who you're trying to talk to. You're always trying to sell yourself, whether it's your customer base or your staff or your investors, or you're trying to convince them you want them to do something now or ever. And they're more likely to do it if you talk to them in a way that makes them feel like they want to do it.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. There's a really great entrepreneur called Emma Reed. I don't know if you've heard of her. And she has a really interesting podcast as well. She talked about I think she was around in the 90s, and she kind of talks about kind of just knocking on people's doors, you know, and having that courage. And sometimes I think the tricky thing with our generation is we are to some degree behind a screen, you know, and what I've learned is to kind of break out from that and just go to the places. And especially with the kind of business we're doing, we have to go to the venues and ask for the contact details, just go and speak to someone. And that takes boldness, and it takes courage. It's not easy. We
really have been dumping on Gen Zs a lot, but Gen Zs tend to find themselves behind the screen, but then feel very comfortable behind the screen and want to stay behind the screen. And you know, the tendency is to send an email to communicate with somebody. Well, you know what? Just pick up the phone and explain the problem and what you want them to do, and the chances are they'll fix it there and then. You get an email, somebody go, oh, them again, or you know, whatever. You lose control of somebody receiving an email, and if you talk to them on the phone, it's a lot. You talk to them in person, it's even better, because they'll go, oh, you know what? Yeah, right. Okay. You know what? Let me do that. In fact, let me just do that right now, and it's out of my hair and whatever. It's just like a way of circuiting things. So I think communication, there's so many means of communicating with people, but we don't communicate still very well with people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still genuinely believe, I think it's one of the most exciting times to be an entrepreneur. Like I said, in terms of opportunity, accessibility. And now you could just do it. You could set up a business for like £50 on HMRC, you know. It's like, talk about being, you know, accessible. That is so accessible.
Yeah, and try things. If they don't work, then so what? It's not a big deal. Try that, or pivot, or change, or figure out, you know what, there's something in there that's not quite right, but if I dig some more, I find out what's wrong about it and put it right.
Yeah.
And before you know where you are, you've got something that people want.
Yeah.
And you got a little business.
Yeah.
And you can scale it.
Yeah.
How exciting.
Very exciting.
Wow, I wish I was a Gen Z all of a sudden. Maybe
we can swap. We can do our Freaky Friday.
We can do our Freaky Friday. Sure. Okay, let me think about that. But listen, it's been great chatting. I wish we could stay longer, but I think we've covered a huge range of things, and hopefully, you know, the people listening in, and if they're in Gen Zs for that matter, or certainly entrepreneurs will get a lot from this, and listen and get inspiration from your story. And you're only 28, so you should come back when you're whatever it is, like 38, and we can talk some more.
Might have some more grey hairs by that point.
I look forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Thanks, everybody, for watching or listening. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next episode of the podcast.